It's been a while since we've done a Dissecting Design, but this definitely warrants it. For our video today, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky trilogy that we've gone through and how it really sits as a very fascinating take on JRPG gameplay and storytelling that feels both ahead and a little bit behind its own time at the same time. Before we begin this video, it is of course important to remember that what we're going to be talking about is spoiler heavy, as we'll be focusing again on the 3 Trails in the Sky set of Legend of Heroes. So if you aren't familiar with this franchise, Legend of Heroes is kind of the overall brand, and this brand has been around for a very long time. The games that we're going to be focusing on is kind of what is considered the first trilogy. Like classic CRPGs, the developers kind of have the overall brand, but then there's chunks or different games in that brand that are kind of set in their own specific trilogy with a specific set of characters, setting, and so on. So Trails in the Sky 1 through 3 is considered the first official trilogy of The Legend of Heroes. So the games originally started, I believe this would be PlayStation 1, maybe PlayStation 2 era. I think this was like 2003, 2004. And it was developed by Nihon Falcom, who also did the Ys games, which I have not played yet at this point, but they are on my list to get to. So, one of the first things that Trails in the Sky does, and it does differently from some of the other JRPGs we've seen, is that this is not an anthology series. As in, each game takes place in an entirely different universe, entirely different setting, and so on. Here, they all take place on the same continent at relatively the same time frame. Some games go a little bit further, some games may start behind, but they all generally deal with the same period. Our story, at least in Trails in the Sky, revolves around Estelle and Joshua Bright. And I didn't just play this because one of the main characters is named Joshua. They are trying to become bracers, which is kind of like our wandering hero slash bounty hunter slash person of the people of our setting. And they decide that in order the best way to see this is they're going to travel around the countryside, going from town to town, meeting all kinds of people, and I do mean all varieties, and we'll come back to that in a second. And of course, because it's a JRPG, shenanigans ensue. We discover strange conspiracies, evil, and a group that is trying to threaten the stability of the world as we know it. Our setting takes place in kind of like a mix between a fantasy world and an industrialized world, with everyone using what is known as orbital technology or orbaments as our kind of stand-in for magic. Orbaments are outfitted with different quartzes, which in turn will give like different kinds of powers. And again, this is our analog to magic in the world. And this becomes a major plot point throughout the 3 games here, and I'm sure for the later Legend of Heroes titles as well. The characterization and world building of the Trails in the Sky trilogy is very well done, and definitely one of the best I've seen from the JRPG genre. Because each game takes place with the same set of characters in the same world, it gives the world a lot of time to breathe that we normally don't see from franchises like this. Each one of the game's major towns has NPCs, everyone has a name, they have a personality, and definitely huge props to the localization team for this trilogy, as everyone has a unique line they say. Every treasure chest features a specific or unique line that they will say if you check it again, and you will come to love to see a new treasure chest just to see what wacky line, or even some serious lines, our random treasure chests will say. As for the story itself, the characters are all very well written, and again, because of the fact that they're given 3 games to explore, with the 3rd game kind of being an outlier, and we'll get to that one later in this video, it allows us to really grow to learn and love what each character has and their personalities. And that also gets reflected in the combat that we'll come back to in a second. But you'll see the growth of our main characters, especially again Estelle and Joshua, who have some major plot points that they share, and I will not be spoiling the major story in this video for obvious reasons. The structure again is a chapter by chapter format. Each chapter takes place in a specific point in the continent or in the countryside. You'll find different monsters, you'll have an overarching main plot, and of course loads of side quests. And the side quests here are very well done, and they almost reach kind of the heights of these sub-stories that the Yakuza games have become famous for. You see, each side story will involve you doing all manner of tasks. Some may be as simple as you just going out in the world and being up a mini-boss. Others may involve you solving a mystery, investigating people, learning more about the countryside and the various towns, solving riddles, and many, many more things. The game rewards you for doing these by affecting your bracer rank. Every time you complete a quest, you'll gain points. Gain enough points and your bracer rank will evolve or go up, unlocking specific rewards. And if you want to see literally everything in this game, then you are going to be doing all these quests. My main issue with the side quest system in this is that it goes for very much a point of no return structure. Certain quests are only available not only within their specific chapter, but within specific time frames within the chapter. You see, the game measures time based on every time you complete a kind of portion of the main quests of that chapter. So certain quests may not become available, you may not notice them, or they'll run out, even if you have them in your collection, if you don't do them within a specific period of time. And one of the things I do like about the 3rd game is how they completely restructure the side quests in a different way. But this can become very frustrating, especially with the game's kind of twists, that the game will carry over progress and stats, I believe, from game 1 to game 2 and from game 2 to game 3. So if you really want to see everything that this series has in store, you are going to have to 100% every game. But again, if you just are here for the story or the general combat, that is not necessarily required. And for one last point before we move on, definitely want to give a shout out to the music in the trilogy. Really enjoyed all the themes, and the music certainly goes hard, especially during the more emotional moments. And this game is perhaps one of the most jazziest battle themes I think I've heard from a JRPG since the Persona series. Now, with that said, let's get to how combat and progression work, as you'll be doing a lot of it as you explore the country of Liberel, which hopefully I didn't butcher that too badly. Combat here is turn-based. Now, it is not random encounters in the same way as other JRPGs. Enemies will wander around on the map. If your party connects with them, you get into a fight. If you hit or touch an enemy from their back, you'll start with an advantage. If they do the same to you, they'll start with an advantage. Combat is built on turn-based combat, with each character having specific timings based on their kind of speed or agility stat. Each character gains access to specific abilities of their own. These are kind of like their special moves, and they'll also be able to use skills and or their kind of orbment spells as well. How this works, and this again relates to the orbment system, is that each quartz comes in a different color. Each color has a corresponding kind of spell tree that goes with it. Blue, which is related to kind of water and ice, also responds to healing. Fire can also affect attack buffs. There's time, space, and other abilities. Many of the advanced spells in this game require you to have certain values in multiple kind of elemental trees. So if you want kind of the super deluxe ultra AoE healing, you'll not only need a high blue on a character, but you'll need other colors as well. And this also relates to which characters you bring in your party. Your party will always be limited to 4 characters, no matter when you are playing or at what point. And each character has a different kind of ornament that they use that corresponds to their personality. Chloe, who is also your dedicated or one of the best healers in the game, her ornament has a lot of blue slots, which again relates to her using more healing spells. While Joshua, who does a lot of high speed, like assassin style attacks, he has a lot of kind of speed related or time related skills and ornament slots. And you are free to mix and match your party based on where you're at in the overall campaign. In the third game, they kind of open things up so you can have any party member equipped at any time, with exception to whoever is the principal lead at that point. But in the first 2 games, you will most likely have Estelle and Joshua in your party for the most part. The unique aspect of combat is that there is a timeline on the left, and you can manipulate this timeline using your character's special moves as they build up their meter. And the meter that we're talking about is going to be CP. When it hits 100, you can kind of insert their ability anywhere into the timeline, even before enemy attacks, in order to use their special. And again, each character has different specials relating to their abilities. One character's special is kind of the AoE super shield, while another character may get a single shot high damaging skill and group wide skill, and you get the picture. On the timeline, there are various buffs that are randomly placed into it, and if the character's icon matches its position, they will get access to it. So this could be anything as minor as this character heals a little bit, to the next attack is a guaranteed death or instant blow attack, or increased crit, and so on and so forth. And this point of it is really well done. Now, I do have issues with the combat that we'll talk to when we get to kind of my negatives with the trilogy. As you explore the world, you will get access to better gear, and more notably, you'll get access to better quartzes. This will allow you to upgrade and use higher quality ornament attacks, and this is going to be the main form of kind of progression in the game. You see, the different ornaments or the different quartzes will have different qualities of their skills, and the character's own stat, the specific one being the arts attack, will affect their overall damage. Some of your characters are specifically meant to be kind of frontline heavy damage characters, while other ones will be more spellcasters or a mix between the two. And this is one of those games that by design, you don't want to push a character outside of what they're better at. Agate, who is kind of your rush in, hit enemies really hard, think later kind of character, he will never be an art-stealing character, no matter how you build them. While again, characters such as Chloe, and even characters such as, let's see, what was her name? Sherazard, who, again, I am probably butchering some of these names, I apologize. They are more known for being able to do arts damage. And again, this becomes a major aspect when we talk about kind of the difficulty spikes and the difficulty curve of the 3 games. As a very interesting aspect, and one of the reasons why I play the remastered trilogy rather than the original, are the numerous quality of life features that were added to this. Perhaps the most fantastic one is double speed. At any time, you can hold down one of the triggers, and everything moves at double speed. Walking, animations, cutscenes, and so on. As someone who hates slow moving in games like this is a godsend for me. As another feature that I find very fascinating that I think should become a standard of any kind of turn-based game is what they call the retry offset. How this works is every time you lose a fight, whether it's a normal enemy, elite fight, boss, even the final boss of each game, you basically get a mulligan. What happens is that all the boss's stats are cut by a specific percent. Each time you die, this percent gets higher and higher and higher, to the point that no matter what difficulty you're playing on, you will eventually just have so many mulligans built up that the boss will not be able to do anything. And this is a very big deal with how the game kind of gates progression, again, the story progression of the title. At certain points, you will be put into points of no returns, and if you're not careful, your characters may be either severely underleveled, or they may not have the right ornaments and specific items needed to just kind of fight on even footing. There are many, and I do mean many, boss fights throughout the 3 games where the difficulty spikes. Such as in the second game where you have to fight various members of the evil group that's trying to destabilize the countryside. And these characters can be very punishing to fight. And with that, I think that is a good segue into talking about my issues with the game, and then we'll kind of talk about the black sheep of the 3 games with number 3. As I said at the start, the game in some respect feels ahead of its time. The storytelling and characterizations are incredibly well done. I generally wanted to see where the story was going to go and follow where these characters are going to end up. As I said, with this first trilogy, you're going to keep with this party from beginning to end. And I'm sure in the later trilogies, they may either show up as guest characters or may be referenced in some respect. But when we talk about where the series kind of falls back on some of the more annoying tropes, it is most definitely with the combat. You see, this is a series, as I said, with all the different ornaments and all the different elemental qualities, there is a huge amount of skills in this game, and the vast majority of them are going to be useless to you. Healing skills, status curing skills, they will be very important for you, but there are so many skills in this game that are just, well, literally not worth anything to use in combat. You see, again, because the art's attack stat kind of is king in terms of damage potential, it means that a higher quality skill will not do anywhere near as much damage, or is just not worth it to use compared to the smaller skills on a character who has high enough arts attack. Typically speaking, with how the game is balanced and how stats are balanced or factored into combat, if you can do at least 1,500 to 2,000 damage with an attack, be it a normal attack or one of your arts attack, that is kind of the baseline you're aiming at. Many bosses become damage sponges, especially the final bosses in the game. Speaking of those bosses, this game commits the JRPG sin of, we're going to give you all these status debuffs and ailments and so on, and every boss is immune to the ones you want to use it on. Stuff such as reducing the enemy's attack or reducing their defensive ability, bosses will just flat out resist them. And this is a very big deal because many bosses will get very powerful skills that take multiple turns to charge. And you would think that you would want to use something like a skill to reduce their damage, or use the ability to kind of impede them. One of these status ailments you get that can also be modified by certain quartzes is you can interrupt an enemy's charge. This works on a lot of the normal and elite enemies, but most likely, most of the bosses will resist them, unless you use kind of a character-specific impede skill, which has a higher chance of doing it. But in a lot of cases, especially for some of the hardest bosses in the game, there is nothing you can do. Once they begin charging their ultra maximum super attack, it's going to hit. And when it hits, it is going to hit hard. However, as I'm sure a few fans are getting ready to comment down below, there is a one-stop magical cure-all to all of your problems with the combat in this game, and the word is shield. There is one of the kind of tracks of spells, I mean this is the Earth track, gives you varying shield type skills. The basic ones will just give you more defense, but the highest quality, the very big one that you can get, is literally damage immunity. That is not hyperbole. The highest quality shield that you can unlock for your characters will block the next source of damage guaranteed. And if you are playing this on the higher difficulties, or you are trying to play this legitimate, this borderlines between being game-breaking and absolutely required in some sections if you want to stand a chance. And like I said, this is not hyperbole. It will save your run in many cases. And characters who have like their own shield that they can bring in, such as our main character in the third game, Kevin, his ultimate is just basically give everyone 2 free turns of no damage, becomes such a major point. If you're playing the series on easy mode, it's probably not going to matter as much, but if you're going for nightmare difficulty, or just trying to get through without any game overs, you are going to need this for sure. And it does end up being more frustrating because of this combat system, because it gives you so many choices and depth in terms of the timeline system, timeline manipulation, but because so many of the skills just do not work on the bosses, it just cuts the potential of the combat system drastically down. And like I said, I have not played any of the additional trilogies as of recording this video, so I do not know firsthand how things differ in them. But it's definitely a huge kind of black mark against the first Trails in the Sky or Legend of Heroes trilogy by the fact that combat just doesn't really feel as good as it should. And like I said, there are some painful fights. Each game's final boss is going to be a hair puller. And I'm going to admit this right here. For Trails in the Sky 3, I went all mulligan on that fight. I'm pretty sure we could have devised a drinking game for the number of times I just let the mulligan build up for that final fight in order to see the game all the way through. And like I said, if there wasn't this kind of retry offset system in this trilogy, I would not have finished it. Absolutely not. So with that said, let's move on and talk about the third game, because this is the one that is kind of seen, at least for this trilogy, as the black sheep, because it changes the structure in many ways. In an unusual twist, it is perhaps the most gameplay forward of the 3 games, while in a way being the most reductive in terms of its story. So the third game takes place about half a year after the events of the second game. It is the only game in the kind of the trilogy itself that you do not have Estelle and Joshua as your principal characters. Again, falling to Kevin, who was one of the side characters who was introduced in the second game, and now kind of stars in the third one. And it's very interesting what they did with it. I was looking at the forum, there were some rumors, I don't know if this is true or not, that the third game was kind of made as more of a budget saving measure rather than trying to really go big after the events of the second one. So the third one takes place in more of a dungeon crawling respect rather than the chapter by chapter or town by town format of the first 2 games. So you're trapped in a dungeon or in another dimension, and I won't spoil the major story beats of the third game obviously here, but it's made up of places and events of the last 2 games. So it gives them the excuse to just kind of cut and paste various parts of the town or various environments and let you run through with different enemies and a different party. This is the only game in this original trilogy where you are given full party customization. You're going to be given the who's who of major characters from the first 2 games, and once again, you are still limited by 4, but you are free to choose any 4, especially again for some of the final challenges. The game even pulls a Final Fantasy VI at times, having you create multiple parties who will explore different paths in an individual chapter. A unique aspect of this one is that you can set one character as your support, who provides unique or different passives that will affect your main party. As I said earlier, the side quest system is very well done in the first 2 games, and it is completely upended for the 3rd game. Instead of story or side quests being locked to specific chapter beats, here they are tied to different doors. There is a star, sun, and moon door that you'll find hidden in each one of the game's areas, and you're also able to fast travel to any of the kind of checkpoints in each chapter. Each door has a specific challenge for you to get past it. It could be as simple as bring the main character of the story to it, or it could be something more advanced, like have a specific item, go to a specific area, get something, and so on and so forth. And when you do these sub-stories, they'll reward you with different resources, unique gear, unique quartzes, and so on. But the main point of these sub-stories is to very flesh out the backstories of all the characters. The different sub-stories will take place at various points in time related to the previous 2 games. Some are very, very short. Some are good 30 minutes to an hour. Like I said, if you're someone who is used to the Yakuza sub-stories who can be very lengthy in terms of what you're doing in them, then you should be right at home here. The issue is that they can just completely kill the pacing of a chapter if you're not prepared going into it. This is definitely a treat meant for long-time fans. And again, the 3rd game is very much just positioned as you enjoyed the first game, you enjoyed the 2nd game, here's kind of like our treat for you for the 3rd one. If you're hoping for like grand story beats that are going to change everything that you know about the trilogy up to this point, that's not what this game is about. It feels at times very much like a side story in of itself, or like a kind of final lap with these characters. One last chance to kind of see everybody off one more time before the trilogy ends. And in that respect, the 3rd game succeeds. They also introduce a lot of, like, in a very weird way, they're hidden behind some of the sub-stories, but there's a lot of, like, very important lore that affects, I'm pretty sure they must have some tie to the later games or to the overall plot of the world itself. And they are hidden behind some of the more cumbersome doors to open. But again, this is kind of what's weird about this 3rd game. It feels both out of place compared to the first 2, but at the same time, it kind of ties and wraps everything up in a way that if you're already a fan, this is just more content. And while it does not fix any of the issues that I mentioned with the combat system in the previous section, what it does do is, again, give you the most refined take on this combat. There are a surprisingly high amount of variety of enemy encounters, enemy types, and again, the boss fights. And while the bosses can certainly prove to be frustrating and very spiky in places, they all will test your ability and your combat. And I didn't mention this in the last section, but I'll bring it up here. This is a franchise, or at least these 3 games, where status ailments really matter. And getting the right accessories that will block or resist the ailments of the specific enemies or the specific boss you're fighting can greatly reduce the difficulty of it. As I said, while some people don't like how simplified the story and general structure of the 3rd game is, I really liked it. Because of the fact that it's a lot easier to get around. It's a lot easier to kind of piece things together in this one. You do not have to worry about missing things out. There is only one major point of no return in the third game, and the game will hit you over the head, letting you know that you are reaching it. So to wrap up our deep dive here for Trails in the Sky 1 through 3, this is a very well done JRPG. It really shows how great world building and characterizations are a major cornerstone of RPG design. Again, by the fact that each game is built as a continuation or built off of the previous one, it helps the stakes of the game as well. The first game is very much, kind of plays more like slice of life, we're kind of just going around the countryside, to then allow the second game to be a little bit more darker or raise those stakes. And because everything takes place within the same country, we kind of avoid the JRPG, by the end of the game, if we don't save the day, then the entire universe and all time and space dies. And like I said, with this being part of a greater franchise, or the greater branding of Legend of Heroes, the games do a good job of setting up conflicts and major players that will show up in later entries. And with the third game in particular, with the major sub-stories, they do reveal that just because you defeated a big bad in the second game does not mean that the world is now at peace and everyone is happy and that you're done. And it does, again, give a lot of teasers for potential future conflicts and future big bads that will show up. And again, it all fits within kind of the logical flow of the game itself. And it is very hard for RPGs, let alone when you're building multiples in the same story, to kind of stick the landing and make each chapter feel self-contained, but at the same time build and grow off the backs of the previous ones. And if you're someone who likes, again, a very story-rich game, this is a huge recommendation for you to check these out. And with the remasters that are available on Steam, again, they've also cut out a lot of those pain points. Because of the retry offset system, again, you are guaranteed, by virtue of them just cutting the stats on the fights, that you will eventually win any particularly difficult encounter. And like I said, at some point we will have to get to the other trilogies, such as, I think it's Trails in Cold Steel, and then there's Trails into Zero, Reverie, and one other one that, again, the fans will be mentioning them probably multiple times in the comments down below. But as I said, I'm really happy I had a chance to play through this trilogy. They are really great takes on JRPG design. And if you are someone who only knows JRPGs if they have the words Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest in the title, then this is a great franchise that if you missed out on, that you should definitely check out. And trust me, I have some other even wackier JRPGs on my list that I want to show on future streams and in future videos. So with all that said, thank you so much for tuning in. And let me know what you think of the trilogy and of just Legend of Heroes in general down below. And if you'd like me to take a look at another JRPG series I may have missed, let me know as well. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to do the YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on design, check out my books wherever they are sold. Visit our Discord and Patreon, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where you some of the art and science of games.